Welcome, everyone, and welcome to our workshop titled Nurturing and Building Your DEIJ Community. This webinar series is focused on creating systems and structures to develop a safe and inclusive community for all of your stakeholders. In this three-part webinar series, we will explore ways to build capacity and equity and empower your teachers and staff to become anti-racist educators. This week, we're focusing on building capacity for DEIJ within your community with Joel Liaban. Today, Joel will facilitate a learning session on how diverse leaders can begin to embark on DEIJ systems transformation, starting with self, then moving within our school communities. In this session, we're going to lean in with self and others as we explore a range of principles, provocations, and frameworks that are designed for us to reflect on our own identities and socializations that inform our beliefs and actions. We will learn to challenge our assumptions, asking challenging questions, reflect upon our lived experiences, and nurture our critical consciousness, which are some of the points of departure as we courageously plan systematic and sustainable action. Joel, you're so good with words. I know that's all you, and it's so beautiful. If you missed our last session with Fandy, don't worry about it. We've uploaded the recording of the video and placed it in Canvas so you can view it at any time. Next week, on September 21st, Dominique is going to help us create systems and structures for diversity, equity, and inclusion within our school, and he's here today as well. But before we get started, I just want to do a quick moment to introduce you to a few folks. Okay, I'm located in our Princeton, New Jersey office. I'm Dana Specker-Watts, the Director of Learning, Research, and Outreach for ISS. Also with us today is Mike Pierre, our ISS EDUlearn Virtual Events Coordinator. He works all the magic in the background. He's my partner in crime, and amazing. And he helps us navigate into all our breakout rooms, host polls, and share all our resources and links together. If by chance you're having any trouble with anything, especially if you're having any trouble getting into Canvas, please email us at EDUlearn, EDUlearn@ISS EDU, and we'll get you sorted right away. Without further ado, we want to turn things over to our amazing workshop facilitator, Joel Liaban. Joel's a learner and international education leader who's committed to our collective work for the transformation of international education, grounded on anti-racism and DEIJ. Prior to his current role, he was a learning specialist and instructional coach and school-wide DEIJ lead at ISKL in Kuala Lumpur. He's been in education for over 20 years. He's worked at the International School Brussels, ISB Beijing, and Cebu International School as a classroom teacher, department coordinator, and accreditation coordinator. He's led school-wide initiatives in curriculum, assessment, PD, and innovation. Joel's also been involved in accreditation as a team evaluator during team visits representing NEASC and CIS. He also leads various professional learning for international schools and organizations. He's also the proud owner of 2 adorable dogs. And without further ado, Joel, take us away. You're going to be amazing.
Thank you. Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Mike, for setting us up. Really great appreciation. Before I share, I love watching all the screens right now. And there's so many of you and familiar faces, old friends, new friends. Like, I just want to recognize and honor that. And today I am signing in Hanoi in Vietnam instead of Kuala Lumpur, so I'm an hour earlier today. It was a gift to be able to meet friends and folks who are part of our communities of practice and anti-racism. I got to see Dominico's here for the first time at Eunice with Tanay Naik and so many friends in there. So it's really fascinating to see how we were talking about it. It feels like we've been friends for a long time. And that's the power of community, right? That's the power of the emergence of anti-racism work, because it's really around the questions that we started to ask together. And then we sort of gravitated towards each other and started to listen to one another. And I think that's the power there. Today, as always, I overplan with slides and engagement and all of that, but we will be leaning in and listening to ourselves. If there are times that we feel like we need to stop and prolong a conversation and deepen our conversation, we will. And if we're only getting into the fifth slide, that's the power of emergence, because really it's not about the critical mass, but it's the critical connection and the critical consciousness that we have. If it takes a lot of our conversation, that's a power there in this work. And I think that's a lot of that work I'm leaning in from Adrienne Marie Brown on some of those emergent strategy. And I'll be talking about that as well in a few. So today you will be listening to your friends within breakout. You will also be listening to yourselves, how your bodies are reacting, how your thinking is reacting, how you are connecting or struggling with a conversation or an idea. Listen to yourself and take notes of that, because as you lead these conversations and actions in your community, you'll not only be listening to other people, but you'll also be listening to yourself in this work. And so that is really a critical component to anti-racist work too. All right, I'm going to share my slide. So welcome. And today our focus really is around building capacity for DEIJ within our community. And it's about designing transformative actions and co-creating with intention. So we're sort of narrowing it down to identities. Why do you think identity is critical at the very beginning? And then why co-creating with intentions is equally powerful in our work. So as we move forward, as you're coming in, I'd like you to think about what brought you to this space today. What questions and wonders that you have that have been circling in your mind and DEIJ, not only before, but most recently, probably the most emerging questions that you are having at the moment. And what affirmations do you have for yourself and for others today? So I'm going to give you a minute to think about that, and then feel free to share that publicly, or you can also keep it to yourself. So at this point, I invite you to share if you have something that you would like to press the chat button, and then feel free to share it publicly to our space today. Finding what are the next steps and ideas in our current context and space. And I like the whole idea, Dominic, there around current space and context, because different contexts change and different contexts require different next steps, because we are at a different trajectory in our growth and transformation. Yeah. All right. So as we move forward, we have a platform for engagement. And so I encourage you to type in, if you are part of a breakout session. We don't want to sort of overwhelm the Padlet, but if there are 5 of you and there's only one person who probably can add their thoughts around that, feel free to do that. You can also jot down some notes on your own. So there's really multiple ways of engaging today. And all of those ways of engagement is acknowledged, honored, and valued in our work. So Dana will probably share that one in our chat. Yeah. And then all the resources are also there that we're going to be using today. And if we're not able to use it today, you can use it for your own facilitation. You can use it for your own work later on. You can use it for your own personal reflection. All right. So moving on, you'll probably see some bullet points in here or some icons in here that you'd see. The first one, which is pause and reflect on your own. The second one, you will have share reflections on the chat. You can unmute as well, and you can say, Joel, I would like to say something around this. Yes, feel free to do that, and we can pause, we can stop, and we can listen to provocations, the questions, the resonance that come along. So feel free to unmute, respond, and share. When you see this bullet icon, you can also journal, take notes, you can visualize, you can doodle, whatever that is that really makes sense for you. And then you've got a breakout session as well that Mike will organize and set up for us. So moving on, this is your own personal chat right now, or personal journaling. I love this whole trajectory in here, like being, Like, who are you? And I think the starting point of this work really is around acknowledgement of who we are as individuals, who we are as people, who we are as leaders in our community, who we are as leaders in our classroom, who we are as leaders of systems. But also at the same time, it's not also about system, but who you are as an individual. So think about being and then move into becoming. Daniel Wickner, the founder of Diversity Collaborative, sorry, the founder of Identity-Centered Learning, it speaks about the movement, speaks about the expansion of our identities. And so think about becoming as well. Who are you and who have you become? And then the next part here is around barriers. Like, what might have hindered you from being fully you? And this will allow us to think as well about what might have hindered other people in our community from becoming fully themselves. And as we transition into belonging, what do you think are the conditions that are essential, that are needed, that are fundamental for you to be truly you in your own context, whether at home, at school, in your community, in your places of worship? So I'm going to give you around 2 minutes to sort of jot down and take notes. All right. And if you're able to write down, and you can use this one as well as a starting point and expand them as you continue to write your own sort of personal biography. If you write down and expand it into your own racial biography, that's also a powerful starting point for educators and leaders to get started, creating your own story, creating your own narrative, whether it's a personal or narrative, or it could also be your own public narrative that you hold yourself accountable, or it can also be as a tool for your own personal learning and personal journey. Another pause for us here is around holding change. And this will really zoom into some of those focus that we're going to have for today, because many of us here are finding different ways as to how we can lead this work in our community. And so as we hold change, we're also thinking about what are the shifts that I need to have or I need to do for myself personally and for the systems that I'm leading. So those, when it comes to holding change, how can we build capacity for DEIJ in our communities? And when I say build capacity, it's also about building capacity for ourselves. Because as we facilitate this work, we also need to develop those leadership mindset, which we're going to delve later on, around what are those anti-racist leadership mindset that really will support in our equity and inclusion work in our schools. In terms of shifts, what are the shifts or transformation in our leadership that we need to make as we facilitate DEIJ work? What might be some of the leadership beliefs, ideologies, and disposition that we need to let go now or as we continue this work? What might they be that are replicating harm in our community? And so those are some of the questions that will sort of begin to zoom us into our conversation today. So I know we in education, we love our desired outcomes or specific outcomes. And I know at some point I also like having that. But then to me, desired outcomes sometimes has this sense of rigidity. It's like, okay, this is what's going to happen in the end. But to me, I believe in in that emergence and believe in the continuous work. And so for me, these 4 bullet points really will serve as purpose, potentials, partnerships, and pathways. So it's really a little bit open, so that our community ourselves can participate in our authentic selves, and that really is part of that flexibility in our work. And so today's work is really around understanding how ownership of our identity support us in leading this work, as well as acknowledging our roles and culpability in upholding systems of oppression. Because once we know who we are in our proximity to whiteness, proximity to power and privileges, proximity to marginalization and minoritization, we are culpable or upholding those systems of oppression. At the same time, we're also going to think about what are the pathways that we need to look into around dismantling systems of oppression. When we say inclusion for all, or justice for all, or diversity for all, what might be some of the problematic stance around that? Or can we refocus? What might be the ways that we can refocus those work in language for DEIJ work to really focus on historically and systemically marginalized in our communities? So we'll think about those as well as part of those accountabilities. And then we'll think about the different ways we can explore as international school educators. How can we be in solidarity and collaboration for this work together? Part of that community agreement that we need to think, I know Darnell has shared this one many times in many of our community visioning at ALOC, as well as other conferences. But this is really just a little bit of a reminder for us around that, to self-reflect with vulnerability. Being intimate with imperfection is something that we need to look into, because oftentimes we're so committed to perfection, and sometimes it becomes a hindrance to the courageous work that we're doing. Embracing conflict, seeking to understand, recognizing that you are part of it and it is part of you. So whatever that is, whether we are part of it's white supremacy or racism or casteism or heteropatriarchal ideologies, we are part of it. It is part of us. And so how are we owning that and taking ownership and acknowledging those with vulnerability? We've also seen some of these 4 agreements of courageous conversation. Stay engaged, speaking our truth, experiencing discomfort, and expecting and accepting non-closure. I created a bit of a doodle here of a little bit of a projection or trajectory. It's something new to me, or not yet, or it's beginning. Whereas a little bit of practicing and applying, and then here's some challenging piece towards the other, an arrow to the right, and there's transferring and deepening. And then there are also arrows that go back. And the reason for that is that sometimes we may get into the deepening part and sometimes we fall back. And that is okay. And we have to give ourselves permission to be able to practice it again and again, because it's a continuous journey that we need to look into. And there are times that we are engaged, we're transferring it, we're so committed, and then we fall back and we lose the engagement, or we become fearful of something. And so we don't speak our truth. And so all of those, so what I'd like for you to do is just for a moment, which of the agreements are you putting your attention and increasing your awareness today? And feel free to type it in the chat, whatever that is that you would like to add in there. Mm-hmm. The preface there, Ali, around as a person with power. Yeah. And in all its intersection, how are we experiencing discomfort? Thank you, Sue. Thanks, Alexander. Yeah. So as we get going with our work, this is also very critical as you lead this work in your communities. Raskin, Kroll, and Felix, who has a powerful book that talks about racial equity literacy for educational leaders and for principals, that really talks about how can we talk productively about race and introducing change in our schools. It's not only in race, it's also in gender and caste and all the other intersectional conversations that we have, or intersectional injustice in schools, that each participant in a conversation about race is working within a larger system of dominant white culture. And I think only by being willing to acknowledge this power dynamic can we engage in conversations that piece by piece disrupt the status quo. And when I talk about the status quo, it's not only about pointing finger on the status quo of the system, but really the status quo that we hold ourselves as well accountable. That means it's also the status quo that we hold for ourselves, because we've got our own locus of control as well. What might be that internal power dynamics that you have with yourself that really perpetuates our ideologies, or that supports racial inequity in every layer of our society. And so that's also one thing that's part of your reflection. So I'd like us to pause for a bit and jot down some notes around this thought that I've shared with you. So as you lead this work in your communities, it's also really important to think about the different protocols that can encourage courageous conversations, and also being mindful about what might be some of those systems and structures and protocols or culture in your own school that inhibits courageous conversations. And so it goes back to that whole idea of understanding deeply power dynamics. And it's not only power in terms of positionality or position or the titles, but also the nuance, especially when who are the people who are able to provide time and accountability and money in this work, in your community. Who are the people who are allowed to, or who have the power to silence another person? Who are the people who are able to make decisions solely on their own, without consultation with others? So those are examples of nuances in our community that when you talk about power, it doesn't only land in positions and titles, because there are also power dynamics that are contributors of that's impacted by history, by longevity, or affinity within the community. So those dynamic is also part of that. And so as you move your thinking into that singleton's courageous conversation, think about the invisibility of white racial superiority and minoritized inferiority. So this will lead you to think about internalized racism within our own communities. And it's kept secret as long as people are not allowed to talk about it. And so for many of us here who are in positions of power and privilege in our own positionality and context, how are we removing those barriers so that people are able to talk about it openly and honestly and generously with each other? So how does it look like when you have courageous conversations and dialogues? It engages those who won't talk. It's not that we are being silent. Probably it's because we are by design and by default silenced. And I always go back to some of those thinking that I have, that we need to listen to the silent, the silence, and those who are silenced. Because those three things, three concepts speak of different marginalization and oppression. How can we sustain the conversation when it gets uncomfortable or diverted? And how can we deepen those conversations to the point where authentic understanding and meaningful actions can occur? And I know Ryan here has mentioned something around, when we are really, when we want to fix everything. It is that kind of, how can we accept those non-closures so that we engage your community in authentic understanding, in collaboration, and co-creating with intention, so that we can develop those meaningful actions in our communities. So at this point, I'd like you to type in our Padlet some of those. This one I would like us to publicly write it down. I know that I've given you space to be able to have a choice around your own personal journal, but this time I would like to invite you to write it down in that column in the Padlet that talks about agreement and permission. And this is not only about agreement for today, but this is also an agreement and permission for yourself as you lead this work in your own community, so that others can see what are the agreements and permission that you would like to include. So we agree, or I agree, we give ourselves, or I give myself permission to, and then also acknowledging what can hold me back. So before you begin doing that one in the Padlet, I'd like to share with you my own so I can model that for you. So here are my I agree to. I agree to focus my attention to the impact of our work on the historically and systemically marginalized, invisibilized, and othered in our communities, to ask questions to be enlightened and in a form of genuine inquiry. I give myself permission to speak truth to power, even when my voice shakes, and sometimes I'm easy to get teary-eyed, and sometimes those are my bodily manifestation of truth telling. And listen to yourself around what are those bodily manifestations of truth telling that you have, and you're able to take ownership of that without shame, without inhibition, because you know that when you speak about that and you start tearing up and then you start getting goosebumps, I think those are some of those bodily manifestations that you can take ownership. To sit with discomfort, like many of you have spoken about or written about, uncertainty, absence of answers, to not know yet. Because we have to remember that at some point, whatever it is that we are developing now, we might just be at that moment or trajectory of our movement that we're only planting the seed, and we may not be able to see it growing yet. And that might be for our children and children's children to see. And so it's okay that those uncertainties and absence of answers. So I give myself permission to do that. I also give myself permission to protect myself from contexts that replicate harm. What can hold me back? And this is also a way for me to be able to take ownership of that colonized mindset that I have growing up in the Philippines, where I see whiteness as the place where beauty, success, intelligence, capability, and competence live. And so for me, because of that, I'm shedding so much of my brownness, my Filipino-ness, and also my queerness, because I have an imagination or a construct that's not me. And so for me, being able to think about those, how am I also understanding my colonized mindset and my internalized racism, then beginning to really unravel and take ownership as I unpack them. My subscription to white supremacy culture and my subscription to leadership ideology that perpetuate white supremacy culture in schools and organization. Tima Okun had written those things down, such as urgency, perfectionism. Some of those are examples of that, as well as respectability politics, being able to make sure that I have to wear a jacket and tie to be able to assume that I look respectable. And I think many of us in the othered or marginalized identities, we tend to really grow into that in order to feel that. So I'm also taking ownership of that. And my imposter syndrome, I'm not good enough as a consequence of racist ideologies that's imposed either overtly or covertly within our own systems. At this point, I am going to stop talking, and I would like for you to go back and write down some of those thoughts that you have. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to write down your agreement, your permission, and what can hold you back. And this is also a way for me to model for you how you can also engage your community as you lead your work, whether in small teams or large organizational work. So you have your 5 minutes now. Yeah, I hope you're able to see my screen. So under the column of agreements, you see the first post in there as we work together with our other community agreements. So please add those thoughts in there. I know Miss D already shared her or their thoughts on the agreement. So probably I might be able to transfer that and post it there, if that is okay. I am really terrible at developing some timing in here. So I think we should be about last minute for now, and then we can continue with the next part. So please continue sharing some of your thoughts in the chat, in the Padlet, whatever agreements and permission that you would like to share. And I invite others as well to visit those agreements and permission that are posted on the Padlet. So one of the most important things that I'm learning from Adrienne Marie Brown around holding change is also the clarity as a facilitator in your own work on DEIJ, in your own community, in your own schools, in your own organization. It's also the importance of what it is for you and what it can or appear to be, but would rather not. So for me, this is one of the things that I share with my work, is that I am a co-facilitator, a co-learner, a co-inquirer. We support people moving through a process grounded in our purpose and desired impact. We are supporting the shaping of the experience we want to have together. We nurture leadership capacity for truth telling and asking the hard questions. We cultivate safe and courageous spaces. We move us at the speed of trust. And for me as well, as I was trying to clarify my role, whether at ISS or back at ISKL, it's really thinking about that we are not solving problems for our schools or organizations, because it can be rooted in saviorism, that it's us who will be saving it. We need to be mindful of that as we co-create with intentions, is that all of us are collectively unpacking those equity challenges in our community, so that we're able to also find different ways and pathways for us to be able to solve those problems. To keep people on task, because that is also nurturing learned helplessness. And so for us to be able to do that, if we're keeping people on task, I think the important thing that we need to do is to hold ourselves and each other accountable. Oftentimes, a lot of DEIJ lead or leaders in our communities and organizations who are doing DEIJ work is expected to get us there, but we will only get all our community will get there once all of us are involved in our community work, in our work on equity and inclusion. We'd rather not be an accountability or a task checker. We would love for people to be able to take accountability for themselves, to have that agency to be able to do something for themselves. Or designers of performative actions, or that we have all the answers, that it's okay for us to be able to say, no, we don't have. Or the developer for context actions. And so some of these, it's that what I'm showing to you is that as you're leading this work, and holding change is that you also have clarity as a facilitator around your positionality and role within your own community as you do that. So it's important to communicate that one as well to your community so that they know what your roles and responsibilities are. So we'd like to focus now on the next layer in here on our conversation. It's around shared inquiry and co-construction and co-creation. And why do you think this is critical? That it's not only a single person that's doing this work in our community, that it has to be a work of our community. And so in this work of Paulo Freire, or the words of Paulo Freire, is that the whole idea that sometimes we can also replicate oppression when we also filter the kind of agency that people can create or people can do in our own community. And that whole banking concept of like, I'm only giving this to you, or I'm the one who's delivering what we need to do. Rather, would like to be able to bring out the very best from all of our community members around their own experiences and their own context within this work. And so co-construction and co-creation are really key in the work on DEIJ. And that this whole idea and this whole work really is a process of inquiry. It's not only an accountability tool. We're not only developing accountability tool and accountability measure, but also the learning narrative of our community that is really critical for this work. And so it's important to remember that some of the affirmations that we need to remember is that oftentimes people see DEIJ work and anti-racism work as an issue or a problem, or it's something that holds us down. But it's also something that's really brave. It's bold, and it's beautiful work in our transformation in international school. As we recognize the racism and the colonialism and the systems of oppression in our communities and our structures, that we may not have created it, but we have benefited from it, or we have received it as a heritage of this work. And so think about it as you pause today around what makes it brave, what makes it bold, and what makes it beautiful. All the works in anti-racism and anti-oppression, so that you're also operating from a place of agency, from a place of asset. And so think about those. What makes it brave, what makes it bold, and what makes it beautiful. And know that the Padlet is also a place for you to write down those thoughts. And so other people can see it, other people can benefit from it. So I really highly encourage you to generously provide, share your thinking with others, so that we build that kind of collaborative thinking as a community. So here are some of the grounding around that work. Why it's brave, bold, and beautiful. And I hope that you are able to, that this resonates with you, and you're also like, yeah, that's exactly the same thing as what I'm thinking. And so I would love to hear some of your own brave, bold, and beautiful grounding, so that we can hear from each other, and I can also learn from you who are doing this work in different contexts. So really, it's like, because it's no quick fixes. It's bold work, because it may not happen now or tomorrow or next week or next year. It may happen when we are not even here, because it is a massive transformation. It is relational over transactional. It's grounded in people and purpose. And then we talk about the process and practices that are grounded on people. It is centered on humanity, especially the most historically and systemically marginalized, erased, and silenced. I go back to this permission and grounding for me, because this work really is an acceleration. We know already that our communities are designed for dominant identities, either whiteness or heteropatriarchy. So we need to be able to be mindful that what is this work for and who is this work for and who are we centering in this work. And it doesn't mean that if we're doing that, we're not supporting dominant identities. We are there for each other in order for this work to accelerate. Fearlessness and courage as we align our values with our actions. There will be pushbacks, there will be tensions that require tenacity and work as a community. We ask hard questions. And again, it changes the status quo of self and system. And then, like what Jamila Dugan and Shane Zafir had written in Street Data, we uncover stories of hope and harm and use it as tools for transformation, as opposed to hiding them or not looking into them. It's important to be able to ask those hard questions. And so when we learn it from kids, when we learn it from our trans folks in our communities or our BIPOC in our community, when we listen to those stories of hope and harm, how can we use these stories of hope and harm as tools for transformation, as a generous gift for learning, for us to be able to do that? Because these stories are not easy to listen to. And so we need to be able to be mindful about how are we using it as a gift, taking it as a gift for learning. And as we have repeatedly said before, it is grounded on child protection. It's intersectional, non-selective, and it has to be encompassing, all-encompassing form. Many of our child protection at the moment is really focused on sexual and physical abuse, but it has never really yet been defined as racism and sexism as a tenet of it or important part of child protection. And I think a lot of people are beginning to do this work. We've got ECIS and ALOC collaborating and working closely around how can that be made possible. So I'd like to pause for a bit and inviting you to think about the whole idea of radical. I know the word radical has a bad rap in many different ways and context and construct. But again, we can also use the word radical in a different construct. We can radically transform the word radical. And here's the wisdom from Paulo Freire that talks about it's an invitation for us to commit to human liberation. And I'm going to leave you for a bit to be able to pause and look into it and see some of the connections that you're making after reading the word, the radical. So I hope that as you continue this work, leading this work in your communities, you will use this one as well as sort of a guiding, like a North Star in this work, especially the idea about not afraid to meet the people or to enter into dialogue with them. But at the same time, not assuming that you're the liberator of the oppressed, because that can be in the concept of saviorism as opposed to solidarity, but really committing within history to fight alongside those who have been historically marginalized. So there's a lot in here to unpack. And I'd like for you to take it with you in your communities and look into it and how can you use this one as we grapple with fear, grapple with courage, and that how can we not be afraid to confront, to listen, and to see the world in a different light, to unveil it in a different construct, in a radical imagination. So this is for you to take with you as you lead some of these work in your schools. So what we're going to do today in the next 15 minutes is I'd like for you to be able to go into a breakout room, and there will be a little bit of I hope it's too much of a heavy reading for you, but organize yourselves in your breakout, there's probably going to be around 4 to 5, and I know Mike is ready to send us into breakout. And the question here is around fearlessness and emergence. And so there are 3 articles in the Padlet. Two of them, 3 of them are written by Margaret Wheatley in collaboration with another author, and you will see this. So Hero to Host, Leadership in the Age of Complexity. The other one is Fearlessness, the Last Organizational Change Strategy. And the other one is Using Emergence to Take Social Innovation to Scale. We'll see 15 minutes, and if you need more time, we can always expand it and extend it. So don't be, use this one as a big chunk of time for you to be able to really read it and then engage with your team in this reading, after the reading. So what's going to happen will be, once you will be randomly assigned to your breakout, you will read one of the articles on your own or in rounds with in your partnership. You can be creative around that. But I'd like you to self-organize. I'm not going to over structure our conversation today. What's going to happen is that your highlight and headline, what statements would you like us to deepen our understanding within your own breakout? What questions emerged from your chosen statement? And then, how are these statements important and relevant to our work on school change on DEIJ? All right, so I'm just going to share with you quickly so under leadership shifts, you will see this piece in here. The first article is Fearlessness. The second one is Using Emergence, and the other one is Hero to Host. And then you can also go back to this as your protocol for your conversation today. So you can click that, and that's your guide in your own breakout. So I'm going to stop sharing for a bit, and Mike will send us into breakout rooms, and I'd like you to enjoy that conversation. So don't be, I know we have 15 to 20 minutes in reading that and engaging those conversations. We're going to hop around. What might be any questions that you have that might be in support of the process, or what questions might you have about the process before we send you off to your breakout? Trying to scroll down. Okay. So it's 9:52. Sorry, 19:50. It's my time. Sorry, I'm speaking out, talking out loud right now. We've got 15 to 20 minutes. Mike, we're ready to go. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a great conversation with whatever the resource you were focusing on, whether in fearlessness, whether on emergence, or leaders as from hero to host. I hope you had a great conversation. So before we transition to the next one, is there any any idea or statement that you would like to share to everybody from your conversations today? Feel free to unmute and share your thoughts.
We didn't have a lot of time to actually share because it took time for us to read the articles. But one of the things that really resonated with me in my article, I was reading the hero one, was that, and I keep on thinking, like, we can't do everything by ourselves. Like, we need a community to be able to move forward, and we need to carry each other together in order for us to go together. Like, one leader can't do it alone. And it kind of goes with what I've talked about with my group last week. And it's all about, we need a group of people in order for us to start implementing change, is what I feel a lot of right now at the moment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Maki. Yeah, definitely. Is that idea of, that's why we ground this work on people, that we rely on each other in our community. And yeah, thank you for that. Any other
Can I
idea?
piggyback on that?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Thanks, Joel. Doing a great job today, by the way. I love listening to you. It's like having a podcast on and I'm on a nice drive and there's a beautiful scene around me. That's just like listening to your voice all the time. But I think that point is really poignant in that one, we tend to offload this work, or we see it being offloaded onto those who are from the BIPOC community or those who are from marginalized groups. And this actually acts counterproductive to what we're trying to achieve, because we're offloading the work onto those who are already marginalized and already trying to fight big systems in order to move the work forward. It's imperative that we bring others into that work and into the folds who will represent the dominant class as well, especially because when we look at the structures of our international schools, many of the upper brass and the board members are from those dominant groups. So you have to have them involved in the work in order to get that real systemic change you're looking for, like embedded in strategic plans, embedded into school policy, things like that. The other point I wanted to make is that because we're such a transient community, that's another reason why you need to have a group of people or a community of people doing the work, because we tend to leave, after 3, 4, 5 years. And if you've got the work hinged on 1 or 2 people and they disappear, then that can drastically affect what's taking place at your school and almost set you backwards.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ryan. Really powerful. Thank you. Juan and Camille, right? Yeah. Good.
I think Camille was there first. Camille, give it a go.
No, go ahead.
Thank you. So when I was reading the article, I something that resonated with me a lot is that we always seek answers in needed times, and we tend to rely on somebody to help us solve the problems right away. And it's not this person will they probably, or they not necessarily have the answer or the most adequate answer. And and by the end of the article, when it talks about the heroes, I made a link with being a teacher and how I'm the leader of the classroom. And no, I will not have all the answers every single time, but I will make sure that my class, my team works around it, so we can all get to the point and we can all solve the situation. So it makes me appreciate the leadership I have, because I definitely see some things in there when they ask for opinions, but also on the article said that it's not very helpful when the team chooses just to stay quiet and just see how it goes. Like, people has to be vocal, people has to participate. So those were the things that we discussed in our breakout room.
Thank you, Camille. Go for it, Juan.
All right. So it was really thought-provoking, the fearlessness article, especially thinking about how leaders need to navigate uncertainty. As we were saying before, they don't know what to do sometimes, and but I like shifting that and going into the looking for these islands of hope, these people who are, who have a similar mindset. In this case, it would be our DEIJ committees, if we're lucky to have them, and really trying to find people who are trying to bring change, and they're encouraging others to do what they can. Yeah, just find it like interesting to get more people to take the first step and just face that reality.
Mhm. Thank you. Thanks for your resonance. Thanks for your thinking. And it indeed, like, I think what became a pattern or a thought that we have together is really talking about people. And I think that's why I would go back to people. I go back to grounding. I go back to the word radical. I go back to community. I go back to people working in common purpose and leaning into each other. That's why the intentionality of our process today around permission is really critical, because it needs to make sure that we are becoming more aware of self prior to transforming systems. And that's part of the work that we need to do ourselves. It's not only about the quick fix, but really around what do I need to examine and understand and explore and learn about myself as I lead this work in my community. And so as we sort of wind down into wrapping up into our conversation, really it's about holding change. And holding change means to say we're also making it easy for people with shared intentions to be around each other. And this is from the work of Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategy. How do we navigate conflict and that is generative and accountable? So that we can do the hard work of dreaming, of planning, of visioning, and organizing together, relying on the commitment to the power of the collective. It's not an individual work, supporting people when conflict or misunderstandings arise. And so for me, what does it mean to hold change? And this is not all encompassing. I'm sure for you most likely have your own definition of this as well. So what does it mean to hold change within your own community, a bigger structure, a bigger system? So as you look into that, I'd like to leave you with some of these core principles from Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy. And as you explore that, it's part of the Padlet too. So you can go back to that piece in there, and I can give you a few sort of probably 5 minutes to explore that as well. But really the bullet points that we have there is small is good and small is all. The large is a reflection of the small. And I think she speaks highly about the whole idea of fractal, that we are part of the bigger system, and what we do or what we don't do greatly impact the community and the system that we are working. So our inaction and our action has impact in the work that we need to do in DEIJ. Change is constant, and there's always enough time for the right work. And sometimes we always rely into, well, we don't have time, and usually it gets used as a diversion or a denial of the work. But it's more of, if we put our attention to it, it grows. So that's part of the last bullet point in there. What you pay attention to grows. What I love the most in here is really moving at the speed of trust. And I think this circles back into people again, that instead of building that critical mass, it's about the critical connections. Like right now, for me, as an example, is that my work right now for a week here at UNIS Hanoi really comes from the critical connections that I have with folks here in UNIS, and it's not it did not happen by chance, but it happened because of those critical connections in different pockets of our conversation. And so really, as a wrap up, I encourage our community to continue to build those critical connections. You will realize and you will notice there are so many different communities that are happening. They are not in competition, they're in collaboration. So you will see different leadership cohort, you will see different DEIJ initiative that are happening in different places. Tomorrow we will be sending out the newsletter from Diversity Collaborative, and you will see a range of engagement that are happening. And if you think about it, we reflect upon it, 2 years ago, and we probably wouldn't see a range of these communities and pockets of learning. As we speak, there's also concurrent work happening with the Council of International School, and that's so powerful. There's so many different organizations learning together in collaboration with each other. And I think that is part of the critical connection that we need to look into. So as we move forward, what are we paying attention in our communities, in ourselves, that we want to grow? And this circles back to the first one. How are we listening to ourselves? And how are we listening to our communities? And so I invite you to look into the principles that resonate strongly with you and what it means to you. And it's also part of our, if you look into that, it's this emergent strategy from Adrienne Marie Brown. So I sort of type them all in so that it can be condensed in there for your own references. Knowing that we don't have a lot of time, this is basically your own resources. You take it away with you, especially with leadership dispositions and mindset. What is it that you would like to nurture as you lead this work? There's a whole concept of fractal, intentional adaptation, decentralizing, being interdependent. We talked about that one with people. The non-linearity of it, how it's iterative as a process. So those are some of the examples that I'd like you to look into as you dig deep into that. Another resource that I'd like to share with you too is some of these readings from Culture Responsive School Leadership, Minoritization as Oppression, written by Mohammed Khalifa, and it's a really powerful resource. I'd like you to read one of those pieces in there that can really inform some of those work that you're doing. This area around leadership for equity and inclusion, it has resources on leadership disposition. So I encourage you to use this sort of team reflection, and you can pull it out, bring it to your own team, let your leadership team lean into those leadership disposition, and then identify the concept, connection, challenges, and changes. So what we're doing right now is really building capacity so that when you go back to your own communities, you have these ready to go resources that you can use, and feel free to use them. They're annotated with Leadership Academy, and so we're very grateful of their work on that, and we'd like to acknowledge that here as well. For now, we have roughly around 10-12 minutes, and so we can hold the space for a bit for you to be able to ask questions, share some of your ideas, and connect with our community. So yeah, I'm going to stop sharing, and any sharing you'd like to share, questions that you have, we can hold the space for the last 12 minutes in our conversation.
I have, can you?
Yes, go
I'm
for it.
curious, because I mean, even when it comes to DEIJ, things like this, sometimes it's not an act of volunteerism. It's an act because it's a requirement. And sometimes I wonder if my school is doing it because they're jumping on the bandwagon, and it's something that we need to do, or if it's, or is it something that we inherently want to do? So my question is, and I'm going to be open and honest right now, and I wonder how many people here are doing it because the school has requested that they join this workshop, or that they're here because they really do want to be here.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's a rhetorical question. So
great question, Lolita. There's a really the book from
I know.
The Wake Up by Michelle Meejung Kim talks about that first idea around grounding, that talks about the clarification of our why. Like, why are we doing this work? Is it about us? Is it about being able to save and help? Or is it about, this is the moral imperative of educators to really ensure that all of our kids can participate in spaces of learning and living in their most authentic selves, in their full selves, without shedding any parts of who they are. And so that to me, even when I say that to me is my personal why, because I've been complicit to a system where I've robbed the kids of the opportunity to show their joy and genius, because I was only teaching a story that is singular, and it's through that opportunity, it really is that we need to clarify our why on that work. And so if you get your own why, Lolita, you bring it to your own community, and probably allowing people to say, what can we bring into this why so that it snowballs into our collective why? That could be a process that can be emergent too. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
We've got two hands up, Ryan and Dana.
I'm just going to jump in real quick because just as from an organizer point of view, to the best of my knowledge, we sent this out and I think to the best of my knowledge, it's voluntary. I don't know of any schools that mandated anyone take this particular course. There might be pressure in people's why, might be because they know their school is doing this work, or they may have been suggested from a school administrator, but we really try to provide autonomy for all teachers so that they are engaging in professional development and growth in things that really interest them, because we know that matters. But I can't speak to, the reasons why for everybody, but on the organizer side, that's what I know.
Thanks, Dana. Ryan, and then Maya.
Why don't I let Maya go first? I've already occupied space here today. Maya, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, thanks. I think one thing that you shared that really resonated with me is the idea of doing DEIJ as a part of child protection, because I think that is absolutely a part of all of our responsibility, and thinking of it beyond just like, abuse or like home or classroom situations. Because if our students are sitting in our class being unseen, or their teachers using offensive, derogatory language to talk about their culture, their accent, their language, they're inherently who they are, then our kids are unsafe. And for me, that's my why, because I have observed unsafe situations for students of color and students who are in minority groups in multiple schools. So I'm really grateful that you raised that as a part of child safety and safeguarding.
Thanks, Maya. Ryan, go for it.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to kick back to Lolita's point. I think it's a brave question to ask the group, and probably was on other people's minds. But I think, from my experience internationally, you're going to get a mix of people who are inauthentic or authentic or performative in doing the work. I think that's what we'll see. But for me, I think if at the end of the day, if there are students who are being better served because of the work, and even though it might not be as authentic as those of us that are on the margins want us to be, then it's a good thing if it's serving our students better. I think about, my situation at my school. There's 5 students who look like me at our school, and 2 of those 5 are my twin daughters. So, if there are people doing the work here and may not be as authentic as I am with it, well, at least it's getting done and on a larger scale than if I was just a 1-person wrecking crew. And that means that, kids that are BIPOC or from the LGBTQ plus community or marginalized in other ways are being better served. And at the end of the day, it's a good thing. And Joel so eloquently said that, we hope that as our why starts to rub off on other people, they might move from, the middle of the bus to the front of the bus and things like that. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. So I'm just going to leave you with thank you for all your thoughts. And I know that at the in our Padlet, there are a lot of connections in here, agreements. This is really a wealth of thinking and information from all of us. I mean, if you look into them, this is why in development here. And so I invite you to use this resource into your own learning and action taking. And so really, when you go back to your communities, as we wrap up, look into this equity lens, like who is being well served and who is left out or harmed by the policies and practice of the organization. This is one of the questions of the National Association of Elementary School Principals, and that's part of their DEIJ and equity work in there. Another one is around from street data, is that how would you know if you were making a difference for children in the margin? And the last piece in here around the wake up is that if the good we are seeking in this world is advancing social justice and equity for all oppressed people, then we must measure our goodness by the outcomes desired and the impacts felt by those to whom justice and equity have not yet been granted. And only they get to decide when something, our efforts, our impact, our apology, our outcomes is good enough. And with that, I would like to end with a thank you and appreciation to everybody, and also to Mike and to Dana for organizing this professional learning through ISS. Also, Mike is by the way, I just want to plug this one too. Mike is one of our really talented, cool member of our community here at ISS, and he has a book, a coloring book available on Amazon, Black Lives Matter coloring book for kids, and this is one of them. One of the samples, and the coloring work by Dana. So thank you for that. And I just would like to share this as part of that celebration. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone, and stay in touch.
Thank you.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.